I don't have a problem with the WNBA players asking for a raise. The WNBA is on a hot streak. I don't care about the previous 24, 25 years. As an investment, it's starting to pay off. And so this week they wore T-shirts saying, making a statement, you better pay us. But instead of just leaving it at that, Kelsey Plum for LA had to take a dig at Caitlin Clark.
There was never an issue with WNBA players asking for a raise. The league was finally gaining momentum after years of struggle. The previous 2.5 decades might have been rocky, but the investment was starting to pay off, and it showed. That week, players made a bold statement by wearing T-shirts demanding fair pay, declaring that it was time they got what they deserved. But instead of leaving it at unity and progress, Kelsey Plum from Los Angeles decided to take a subtle jab at Caitlin Clark, turning what could have been a moment of solidarity into one of tension and division. It was the kind of unnecessary drama that caught national attention, especially when sports commentator Colin Cowherd decided to step in and publicly dismantle Plum's remarks, calling out the toxic jealousy that had begun to infect the league. What followed was one of the most brutal verbal takedowns in sports media history, an on-air roasting that left Plum's reputation singed, and the WNBA facing a harsh reality check. The All-Star Game had been meant to symbolize unity among players. The shirt saying, "Pay us what you owe us," carried a powerful message that resonated with both fans and players alike. It was supposed to be a defining moment for women's basketball, proving that the athletes stood together in their fight for respect and fair treatment. The message was perfect, the timing ideal, and for once, the league was financially on the rise. Yet during a post-game press conference, Plum, seated beside Sabrina Ionescu, made an offhand remark that changed the tone completely. She mentioned that none of the players from Team Clark had been present during the meeting about the shirts, turning what should have been a symbol of unity into an accusation.
Well, it was a very powerful moment. We didn't, at least as players, we didn't know that was going to happen. So I think it was kind of like a genuine surprise, but the T-shirt, just united front was determined this morning. That we had a meeting for, and not to tattletale, but 0 members of Team Clark were very present for that.
The room went silent. Even Ionescu looked visibly uncomfortable, laughing awkwardly as if trying to diffuse the tension.
Even Ionescu looked uncomfortable, awkwardly laughing it off.
We had a very
that really needed to be mentioned.
I'm trying to make a situation light, okay? But
Plum's words weren't just a comment. They were a public display of pettiness toward the very player who had revitalized the league. What made it worse was that Caitlin Clark hadn't even played in the game. She was injured, sitting on the sidelines, yet she had still worn the same shirt in support of her fellow players. Her actions reflected nothing but respect and solidarity. So why attack her? What did Plum gain by throwing shade at the one person who had done more for women's basketball than anyone in recent history? That was when Colin Cowherd decided to weigh in. On his show, he tore into the situation with sharp precision, defending Clark and calling out the toxicity festering among certain veteran players. His words struck deep, exposing how jealousy and entitlement were undermining the progress Clark had brought to the league.
Okay, if you're in a band and you're staying at the Motel 6 and you add a band member and now you're at the Ritz-Carlton, keep your issues to yourself. All right? You went from a Motel 6 in a sketchy part of town to a 4 Seasons in the shopping district.
Cowherd reminded viewers that before Clark's arrival, WNBA players were struggling just to make ends meet. Many teams were forced to fly on budget airlines, staying in cheap motels, and sometimes paying for their own amenities. Crowds were small, merchandise sales nearly non-existent, and financial losses were the norm. But when Caitlin Clark joined, everything changed. Within months, merchandise sales skyrocketed by 500%, attendance rose by 40%, and franchises that had been drowning in debt started turning profits. The Indiana Fever, once a struggling team, suddenly had a season ticket waiting list for the first time in its history. Cowherd painted the perfect analogy to capture the transformation, saying that before Clark, these players had been flying on bright yellow discount planes that charged for water, but now they were flying private, and still complaining about the person who made it happen.
So the T-shirts don't bother me. But why do you take a shot at the Golden Goose, Caitlin Clark? You guys were flying before she arrived on one of those airlines that made you pay for a cup of water. One of those airlines that is the planes are the color of a highlighter. Now you're flying private.
Caitlin Clark had become the golden goose of the WNBA, and yet instead of appreciation, she was met with resentment. He continued to emphasize that he had no issue with the T-shirts or with players demanding more pay. They deserve better. But he couldn't ignore the irony of attacking the one athlete responsible for the league's financial resurrection. Cowherd's message was clear. It was time for some players to grow up. He noted that Clark's endorsements alone had earned her over $11 million that year, meaning she didn't even need the WNBA to thrive financially. The league, however, needed her desperately. She was the reason sponsors were investing, the reason young girls were buying jerseys, and the reason ratings were breaking records. Yet some veterans still treated her like an outsider. The jealousy was unmistakable. During All-Star voting, fans ranked Caitlin Clark first among guards, but her fellow players placed her ninth, a blatant sign of resentment from within. Cowherd highlighted this hypocrisy as proof of how deep the envy ran. He compared Clark's meteoric rise to that of Michael Jordan's early years, pointing out the identical patterns, how both revolutionized their leagues, both faced hostility from older players, and both became global icons almost overnight.
I think they deserve a big raise, maybe not 50% of revenues, because NBA stars, there's a lot of them, and they move the needle. The WNBA stars, well, there's one that moves the needle.
Just as the Bulls had recruited enforcers like Charles Oakley to protect Jordan from rough opponents, the Indiana Fever brought in tough, defensive-minded teammates like Sophie Cunningham to guard Clark on and off the court. The comparison wasn't just symbolic, it was prophetic. Cowherd explained that what fans were witnessing was the birth of a new era. Caitlin Clark was only at the beginning of her journey, and this was the worst she would ever be. Every challenge, every hard foul, every snide remark from jealous veterans was only making her stronger. He said that intensity and heat forged steel, and that Clark was being tempered by fire into something unstoppable. The smart players already recognized this. Teammates like Lexi Hull, Sophie Cunningham, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston embraced Clark's presence, understanding that collaboration would elevate everyone. They supported her in times of struggle, celebrated her victories, and built the kind of chemistry that could define a dynasty. They were smart enough to see that Caitlin Clark's success didn't threaten them, it carried them forward. But others, like Kelsey Plum, were setting themselves up to be left behind. Their refusal to adapt to the new reality of women's basketball would isolate them as the sport evolved beyond their bitterness. Cowherd's conclusion was as brutal as it was honest. He acknowledged that the WNBA players deserved a pay raise, but the truth remained, there was only one player moving the needle, and her name was Caitlin Elizabeth Clark. The NBA had several superstars who drove revenue, the WNBA had one. She was the heartbeat of the league, the reason for its newfound relevance, and the force drawing millions of new fans into the stands. Every statistic, every broadcast rating, and every merchandise sale pointed back to her influence. Still, some veterans seemed unwilling to accept that reality. Cowherd called out their hypocrisy one last time, saying that they were living in luxury hotels now but still complaining about the person who had lifted them out of budget motels. His warning was clear. If the league didn't stop biting the hand that fed it, it risked destroying the very success it had fought so long to achieve. The jealousy and division weren't breaking Caitlin Clark, they were shaping her into something even more formidable. Her determination, resilience, and grace under fire were turning her into the face of women's basketball, not just in America but globally. Cowherd predicted that the Indiana Fever would never trade her, calling her the Steph Curry of the franchise, the foundation of its future. The transformation was already in motion, unstoppable and inevitable. Those who embraced it would thrive, those who resisted would fade into irrelevance. For the fans, sponsors, and young girls inspired by her story, there was no doubt where the future of the WNBA was headed. Caitlin Clark was the golden goose, the league's savior, and the catalyst of an era defined by growth and opportunity. And those who tried to cook her out of jealousy would only end up hungry, watching from the sidelines as she soared to heights no one in women's basketball had ever reached before. That's it for the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.